Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of I Demand a Homestead. My name is Amanda, and this annoying fellow here is Dave. Hello Dave, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today we're going to talk about how to actually split the wood. So we're going to talk about a little bit of science, which is okay, to understand how wood splitting actually works. Going to demonstrate using both different types of maul axes or splitting axes. We're going to talk about that.
Very good. Shall we begin?
Yes, we shall.
Okay.
All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is the wood itself. So right now I have a piece of birch here, and this was cut over the summer. So you can kind of take a quick look at that there, Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I want to point out as well is that notice that this piece of wood I have is smaller than the stump. And that's really, really important because you want to make sure that whatever happens on the stump itself. You don't want it to kind of go across and bigger than that. So you want to make sure that it actually is smaller than the stump, so that's good. Now, when I look at this piece of wood, birch typically tends to be wood that's a little easier to cut in terms of it is not as hard as some of the other woods like an apple or an oak. So because of that, I think what I'm going to use is not the big isocore one, but I'm going to use the smaller Fisker's axe,
So,
which is the 5.8 pounds one.
we did talk about the different types of axes and what they were, which ones you might want in our first video on splitting wood. So if you're not sure what we're talking about, please check that one out on my I Demand a channel.
Exactly what she said right there. Okay, so I'm gonna pick up the Fisker's axe, the smaller one, the 5.85 pound one. So a couple things, and Amanda, maybe you might want to move over that way. So I want to talk a little bit about what causes wood to split. And I apologize, it's going to be a bit of a science lesson, but I promise to make it reasonably painless with respect to how it's going to work. So what you're trying to actually do is transfer energy from the swinging of the axe and the weight of the axe onto the wood. And you want to do it so that it actually travels along the fibers and kind of splits that particular wood. So to do that, and it's to use kinetic energy, you actually need two things. You need mass, which is weight, and you need velocity, which is speed. So in other words, what causes something to split is how heavy the axe is and how fast you can move it, okay? So in this particular case, because the wood is reasonably light or not as dense or as hard as some of the other woods, I don't need to actually have a super heavy axe, nor do I need to swing it super fast to be able to split it. So that's why I chose this particular axe here, is because to some extent, if I don't need to use a super heavy axe, I won't, because with a lighter axe I can have more precision. Also, I actually can move this a little bit quicker and not worry about missing a particular piece of wood. So again, just a reminder, two things that determine whether or not kinetic energy gets transferred from you to the wood is whether or not how heavy the axe is and how fast you move it, okay? So the next thing I want to talk about is, so how do you decide where you want to split the wood? Well, I'm just going to tilt this to the camera here a little bit. And if you can notice here, you notice a couple things. One is that there's some cracks here already, right? So nature has done a really cool thing for me that over time, as it being exposed to the elements, once it's been split, it's now starting to separate the fibers a little bit. So one approach I might decide to take is move along this crack that's already there. I could do that. So I have a couple choices. One is I can go around the crack, or two, I can go along the fiber lines. Well, for me, given that it's birch and it's soft, I'm going to move along the cracks because to some extent, some of that work's already been done. All right? Okay, so we're going to put that down here. So one of the things that is really important that you do is that when you're about to kind of do it, your feet actually have to be about hip distance apart. I'm going to back up a little bit more here, right? Hip distance apart. You want actually all the action with you and your axe to happen in between. Why? Well, it's kind of obvious. You kind of follow this movement here. If it's hip distance apart, you're less likely to cause any damage to your toes here, so we want to avoid that as much as possible. Also, it's a spot where you can actually put a lot of force in. So for this particular situation that we have here, what I want to do is, first thing before I kind of swing, I want to make sure that I know where I want to put it. So I'm going to want to put it right about here, just about the center for me. There is some discussions with respect to, do you want to actually cut through right the center, because that's probably where it's the most dense in some ways. Because again, it's a not as dense wood, I think it's okay to do that. But again, depending on the size of the wood, you might decide as well, if the wood is much bigger, to kind of move either to the left or to the right. For this one, I think it's going to be okay to go down the center. So again, make sure that the air is clean. So I'm cleaning this out a little bit here, like this. So I've got enough room. Move it out like that. Got it centered, right? And because it's light enough, I'm able actually to move the axe back like this, and then slowly swing it down, and your hands can start to move as well. Now I feel like a little bit far. I'm gonna move a little bit closer because I know my swing. Try to keep it in the center like that. Okay? So for me, for this particular piece of wood, it's gonna be speed that does it, right? And I can actually move this relatively quickly because it's light. And I don't actually have to do, and we're gonna show you a little bit later, the wind up, because it's light enough for me to kind of do it that way. All right, so of course we're filming this. Let's see what happens, and we'll go from there. Hopefully I don't cut off anything. We'll be good. All right. All right. So, thank you. Couple things. You saw when I did that as I moved down, my hands slid down to kind of join each other. You might have also noticed that when I brought the wind up, as I came down, I started to go faster. It's that whole energy formula that we talked about before in terms of velocity or speed. So I sped up as I came down, transferred that kinetic energy all the way through. And as you can see, right, a nice split. It actually was along that crack that we had talked about before. That was one of the cracks, okay? So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna split it again, because we like to have a little bit more split with respect to going into our fireplace. Interesting thing about wood is that once you split it, or at least take a piece off, it's much easier to cut the other pieces. So because you've kind of damaged the integrity of what keeps it all together. Now, what's interesting about this as well is because it is where it is, and because the wood's been split, I don't actually need as much force to split this. So I don't even need to kind of like do this again. I can actually just do something like this with respect to splitting the wood, and I'll show you. Because again, this has to do with mass times speed, okay? So let's try this. So I'm just gonna be down here this time. I don't have to go all the way up here, and let's see what happens. Okay, so you see that what happened there, little movement, didn't have to kind of bring it up high, didn't have to have it as fast, okay? Let's do one more, and then we'll move on. Okay? The other thing I want to show you that I just did there, notice how I didn't follow my axe all the way through, and yet the wood still split. Again, just a demonstration of that energy principle, where even just moving the axe just a little bit like that was enough along the fibers to kind of split it. We're now going to move to a more difficult piece, and we'll use the bigger axe from there. Okay, so now that we've cut the smaller pieces, or the easier piece, which is the birch, we're going to move on to something a little bit more difficult, which in this case, pretty sure it's an ash. But Amanda, if you can kind of come closer, what makes this interesting in terms of a piece of wood is there's a knot right here. The wood's a little bit harder. You got this little part right here as well. So I don't think, quite frankly, that the other axe that I have is going to be as effective. So I'm bringing up the big boy, the Isocore 8-pounder. And so to use this axe, it's going to have to be a little bit different, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. But let's go look at the wood like we did before. So I'm planning my strategy. I'm looking at the wood. I want to avoid this knot that's right here, and I want to avoid this as much as possible. So what I'm probably going to do is try to aim it right down the center here, and try to move it that way. Okay, so Yeah,
It's
there's
moving
a
so you
knot.
can see the knot.
There's a knot right there. So I'm trying to avoid that. So I'm going to try to kind of go in between the two to split it. And once I have it split, then it might be easier to work with. So a couple of things with this axe, because it's heavy, unless you're a mountain man or a mountain woman, it's very difficult to do this, right? So I'm going to take a slightly different approach. What I'm going to do is have it hold like that, and I'm going to use this momentum, right? This momentum to kind of swing it, okay? Because this is a little bit easier from a lifting standpoint than doing it like we did with the other one, like this. That's a lot harder, okay? Now, the thing is with this though, what you gain in terms of being able to lift it, you lose in accuracy. So you want to make sure, again, if you have a lot of experience with this, then use this axe, that's wonderful. But if you're new to the whole splitting thing, I would encourage you to use something lighter to be a little more precise. So same thing as before, we're going to keep our feet wide apart. Got the axe like this. I'm going to try to figure out, make sure I'm in the right spot where I want to be. This feels like it's in the right spot. And again, we'll see what happens. Okay, so
Hold on, I'll come in.
come over here. So this is actually excellent. So actually this might be an apple, who knows? But anyway, so pretty much came close to the spot I wanted to hit, maybe even a little bit to the left, which is good, but you can see you trade off accuracy. Now, the good thing is that kinetic energy, even though the axe hit where it did, split the wood all the way down. So now I can just take this out and I can perform a Captain America. Ready?
Yep.
No, it actually was already split. So now I've got these two pieces of wood. It's going to be a little bit easier to split. I think I'm still going to use the same axe as before because I think, again, with some of the knot and how it's a little bit harder wood, this just would be better to do. So it should be not as difficult to do because we've already split it once. So let's see what happens. Yep. Okay. So I've got this piece here. Now, if I wanted to switch to the other axe, I could. But I think I'll just stick with this one. Notice how, with that particular piece, I didn't go all the way up this time. I didn't go all the way like this, because again, the amount of force that was needed, given that the wood was already partly split, in terms of being a smaller piece, was less. So I still did the swinging thing, but I didn't go all the way up to the top here, okay? We'll just do a couple more. Again, these are good sized pieces for the fireplace. Okay. And we have our knot buddy. Now this actually would be suitable to use in the fireplace. So you could leave it like this. Let's see what we can do.
Sorry, get out of your way.
Right. There we go.
Power.
Power. But again, notice, didn't have to go as high. All right? And there you go. So I think we're going to stop for here today. Just to sum up, with respect to splitting, it's always important to keep a safe environment. You saw how we used, and I'll bring the other axe over. You saw how we used a lighter axe versus a heavier axe, when you would use the two of those. We talked about how it's the mass or the weight and the speed in which you kind of move it. The last thing I'm going to say to you, for folks from the Amanda Homestead, is I imagine we're going to get a lot of comments about our wood chopping series. And I think what I would say to all of you is that I'm sure everyone's got their own opinions or own styles. We just wanted to share with you what we use and what works for us. As always, we welcome your feedback. The most important thing though is if you have wood and you have an opportunity to split it, I highly encourage you to do so. It's a very satisfying, very enjoyable thing to do. We could have a wood splitter, an actual machine if we wanted to, but that takes away all the fun. So anyway, back to you, Amanda.
All right. Thank you very much, Dave, for showing us how you split wood. Our first kind of video in this series was what equipment you need to split wood and the safety part of it, so make sure you watch that. And then this one, as you know, is on how to do it. And then I think just because of lengths of videos, we'll talk about kind of how to store the wood, how to measure the moisture, and when it's ready to burn in a third video. So thank you very much for joining us today on another episode of I Demand Homestead. If you enjoyed our video, please feel free to press the subscribe button, and we'll see you in another video. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.